Okay, good morning, everyone. If we could go ahead and get started. You'll see some material in front of you. We included some copies of today's presentation. We also have some other material, overview of the framework key concepts and the language that we've agreed to date. So you have that information in front of you. And then you also have comments that have been provided by committee members on council membership, on area goals and area plan. And those are the three areas that we're going to be concentrating most of our meeting on today. If I could, next slide, please. I'll go ahead and turn this over to Trent so he can do some of the logistics associated with the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome on in. Before we begin, just meeting logistics like usual. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast via webinar and is also being recorded. The recording and materials will be posted to the council webpage. Only members of the committee that are listening in online will be able to unmute themselves to participate. For those online and in the room, please turn on your mic and identify yourself before speaking. And if you have any technical issues, please call the ADWR help desk at 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov. And then I will go ahead and start us off just with roll call. Like usual, if you are online, let us know. And if you're an alternate, let us know. Patrick Adams.
Present.
Paul Brierly.
Here.
Maria Dadgar.
Jay Tompkins, alternate for Maria Dadgar.
Ron Doba.
Ron Doba is present virtually today.
Sandy Favorites.
Rebecca Hudson Nunez, alternate for Sandy.
Jamie Kelly.
Present.
Chris Kuznas.
Present.
Sharon Migdal.
Present.
Haley Paul.
Here.
Karen Peters.
Present.
Sarah Porter. Abe Springer.
Present online.
Craig Sullivan.
Present.
Tom Torres.
Here.
Representative Stacy Travers.
Here.
Chris Udall.
Here.
Chairman Robert Miguel.
Katasha Nakai, alternate for Chairman Miguel.
Chairwoman Amelia Flores.
Present.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Trent. If we could go to the next slide, please. What I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over to Patrick Adams, and he'd like to make some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rural Groundwater Committee. I appreciate you joining us as we continue this important work. It's been 5 months since we were here in this room and Governor Hobbs tasked us with providing recommendations on policy solutions to help rural Arizonans manage their groundwater supplies. And it's really amazing how time has flown over these last 5 months as we've been hard at work. I wanted to start us off today with this committee meeting with a reminder of what we are trying to achieve here. Outside of the state's AMAs and INAs, there are virtually no mechanisms for managing rural groundwater supplies. And we've known this is a problem in our state for decades. And we continue to see more evidence of this problem and its worsening situation. Now, data presented by the department to this committee has shown that 29 of our state's groundwater basins are experiencing, on average, groundwater level declines. We have rural communities that are reliant on a single source of finite groundwater, and they are vulnerable to this ongoing depletion, and they need tools and programs and resources to preserve their water and their future. Wells are going dry in rural Arizona, and we can't stand by and do nothing as this happens. And this is really the backdrop for the Rural Groundwater Committee's work. While the state does have tools it can deploy, AMAs and INAs, this committee has a wonderful opportunity to develop an alternative approach that builds upon our experience of operating groundwater management programs over the last 40 years after the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. I'd also like to touch on process. This committee has been a transparent, open, and collaborative forum since it began, and we've had really great discussions over the last few months, soliciting feedback and perspectives from all of you on the Water Council and your perspectives on rural groundwater management. we've got a framework that we've been working on that's been continually updated to accommodate council member feedback. Now, throughout this process, council members have had differences of opinion when it comes to policy. For example, at the last meeting, there was a suggestion that in a basin experiencing groundwater declines, existing water users should have their historical groundwater uses acknowledged and not be subject to conservation requirements. Other council members disagreed with this perspective, and ultimately the committee moved forward with the consensus view that when we pursue a rural groundwater management program, there should be conservation involved. Now, these discussions and these debates are a natural part of the policymaking process, and we will continue to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and everyone's opinion is noted as we move forward through this process, because that participation is really critical to the work we're doing here today. We know that this isn't easy. This is the first serious conversation about rural groundwater management that this state has convened in decades, and changing the status quo and finding a path forward on this is hard, but it has to be done. Now, I'll admit, I was surprised and I was disappointed that some individuals have chosen to walk away from this process and turn their backs on this issue. But I'm heartened and encouraged and optimistic by the reminder that we have had amazing participation in this group by everyone here around the table and on the council. We've had hours and hours of productive conversation and collaboration here in this room, organic meetings on the side and elsewhere with this group of experts. And we continue to have strong representation from agriculture and rural Arizona serving on the council, and we continue to work together to find policy solutions. I think the committee is doing a great job coalescing around high-level concepts that outline the key elements of a rural groundwater management program. I'm looking here at this one-pager that the department has put together. These are really reasonable, practical outlines of what a rural groundwater management program could look like. And they're at a level where we can still capture the nuances and details and finer points throughout this process that still need to be worked through, because there are many. We're here to find solutions. We're here to work together, and our door will continue to be open to all perspectives and feedback. No water user or sector or geography is under fire here, but we need to find some tools that are going to work. We continue to move forward as a state and as a water community on a challenge that is really in need of a solution here, and that's why this hard, important work needs to be done. And so I just want to thank all of you for the effort you've contributed so far to this process, the time you've invested now and moving forward into the future, and I'm really looking forward to a great meeting today. So I'm going to turn it back over to ADWR so we can dive into our materials for the day.
Thank you, Patrick. And I thought I'd also mention, beside Patrick, Trent, and myself, Director Bashatsky is also joining us at today's table, as is Nicole Klobus, who's Chief Legal Counsel for the department, and Ryan Mitchell, who is the Chief Hydrologist for DWR. Next slide, please. This is today's meeting agenda. We're going to essentially take the same format and essentially move forward with the same process as we have in the previous committee meetings. So we'll go ahead and review the previous components where we've had agreement on, and that's that document that you see in front of you, but we'll go through that one more time. And then we're going to focus most of the meeting on the area goals, area plan, and council membership. If you recall, in one of our earlier meetings, we had mentioned a couple of, at least one starting point proposal, and from that proposal, we developed another proposal that outlined what a rural groundwater management area might look like. As we began those discussions, you all realized that we had to break this out into components so that we could talk in a little more detail about what this rural groundwater management framework and program might look like. So that's where we're at today, and that's what we're going to focus in on, are these three components: area goals, area plan, and council membership. I'd also promised that we were going to bring forward to you a measuring and reporting concept, so we'll also touch upon that. And then we'll also touch upon upcoming meetings and next steps. We're getting close to the December deadline to have recommendations to the governor, but I think we're in a good spot right now. And then lastly, adjournment. And as Patrick mentioned, please be sure to participate. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know. Next. Today's meeting focus and objectives. I'm going to go and, bear with us. Each of you that have been at these meetings have seen this reiterated over and over again. But we think it's very, very important that as we develop this rural groundwater management framework and plan, that there's a recognition that there is a problem. And I view the current state of rural groundwater as more of the problem statement. We all know that outside the AMAs and AMAs, there's limited regulatory framework. There are no requirements for metering and reporting, which is, important when it comes to monitoring and measuring and managing your water supply. Many communities are facing aquifer depletion, and there are increasing calls for a framework that will assist rural communities. I went back and looked at some of the previous frameworks that had been suggested, and it's been about a decade that we've been looking at a potential rural groundwater management framework. So I think it behooves us to have something that's workable that rural Arizona is asking for when it comes to managing groundwater in these rural areas. Next slide, please. These recommendations and the overall goal and objectives really have to support the recommendations that we make to the governor. Again, I'll go through this again, but what I think is important is the fact that we're providing a groundwater management framework that assists rural communities to manage their local groundwater resources, protect water users, and sustainably manage these aquifers. As you all know, these are recommendations to assist communities that are outside the AMAs and INAs, and these are recommendations that need to be broad enough to apply to any groundwater basin's management needs and customizable to be tailored to a basin's unique characteristics. Many of you represent various areas of the state, and various areas of the state have various challenges associated with managing their groundwater supplies, whether it's the type of use or whether it's the geohydrology makeup of those basins. So that's why it's critically important that we develop something that's workable for each of these basins. Next slide, please. The process. And the process, and Patrick mentioned this earlier, but I thought I would go through it one more time, is that we developed a framework to use as a starting point, which was shared with the committee on August 9th. But if you recall before then, June 29th at our first meeting, we put together that groundwater concept matrix. And in that matrix, there were 5 different management programs that we compared to one another on the various components of each of those management programs. And if you recall, there was a lot of similarity between each of those management programs when it came to addressing these rural groundwater tools and management tools and potential options that you could pursue. As I mentioned also, we've been doing this for close to a decade. So this isn't anything that hasn't been discussed before. This isn't anything that all of you haven't been actively engaged in. We then followed that up with a July 11th committee meeting, and at that July 11th committee meeting, we went into a little bit more detail and specifics on a program that ultimately resulted in this framework that we shared on August 9th. All of you as committee members, we've been asking you to review the framework, reach out to your constituents, and we ask you to continue to do that as a representative of either a certain sector or a representative of a community that you may serve. Get your constituents input, and please bring that feedback to these meetings. And then at each meeting, the committee reviewed and discussed the components of the framework and discussed the comments that you have all made, and will continue to do that at today's meeting. We also have engaged with many of the community members in a parallel process where we've had separate meetings with each of you to get a better understanding on some of your comments and get a better understanding of what this rural groundwater management program and framework might look like. Next slide, please. So today our meeting objectives. We're going to review those proposed groundwater management framework components that you have here on the desk. But most of the focus today is going to be on discussing the next set of framework components, the area goals, area plan, and council membership. And then we're going to seek your feedback, as we have in previous meetings, and some consensus on those components. Next slide. So why don't we go ahead and go through these key components? As I mentioned, there was a structure that we developed associated with these rural groundwater management area. And we've already addressed initiation and creation, acknowledgement of existing use. That was something that was added based off of committee input. You know, we need a baseline. We need something associated with acknowledgement of existing uses and users so that we can get a better understanding of what we're dealing with when it comes to these basins and water use. We focused on council duties. If you recall, the committee asked that we focus on the council duties and we focus on area goals and area plan before we talk about council membership. And so we're doing that today, area goals, area membership. And then lastly, if we have time, and hopefully we will, we'll touch upon sunset and review, and then any additional concepts. Next slide. On the initiation criteria, we received community consensus on several concept areas, but this is very similar to what the authorities that the director has today. The director has the option to initiate the process. So this isn't really anything new, and the criteria should not be more onerous than an AMA, establishing an AMA. And that essentially, in my opinion, has to deal with dealing with the problem statement, dealing with, okay, there's an issue, there's a decrease in aquifer levels, the criteria, and essentially initiating the process needs to address that issue. Next slide. The process can be initiated by a county board of supervisors or a petition by a percentage of area registered voters, another area where we had agreement. Now, we have not yet determined the percent number, and that'll be something that will come forward as we delve into more of the details following providing recommendations to the governor. Next slide. Majority agreement, public hearing and approval, very similar to existing processes that exist. ADWR to conduct a hearing process, similar to the AMA and INA process, and then the director has final designation authority. Next slide. This is something that was raised by the committee, an interim pause. The concern was we need to avoid any significant expansion of groundwater uses and users during the designation process and the management plan development. And so the committee agreed on these major concepts: the need for a pause on groundwater use expansion, but no new exempt wells within area boundaries. This would apply to all end users, except there would have to be some exceptions that we're going to have to outline associated with the details that we're going to have to develop after the recommendations. But a couple of those exceptions may be perhaps a well fails and you have to put in a replacement well. In addition to that, there are some requirements by municipal providers and private water companies when it comes to Safe Drinking Water Act issues. So we're going to have to outline those exceptions, but for the most part, put a pause on any additional significant expansion of groundwater use. Next slide. Acknowledgement of existing uses. There was majority agreement on these key concepts. First, there is a need to document current groundwater uses and users if a rural groundwater management area is established. We agreed that it needed to apply to all sectors, all water use types that are served by non-exempt wells, those wells that pump more than 35 gallons per minute. And we need sufficient information to make the acknowledgement determination. We didn't come to any consensus agreement on what might be that sufficient information, but more discussion needs to occur in that area. Subject to conservation efficiency measures or other actions. There are really actions needed to address overdraft and the rate of aquifer depletion. And those actions can come in the form of conservation efficiency measures, and those actions could also potentially come in the form of mitigation measures when it comes to potentially programs such as recharge. The process is to establish a more streamlined AMA application process. As you know, this is being offered up as an alternative to establishing AMAs or INAs. And then when implementing and managing these acknowledgements, there needs to be flexibility and innovative mechanisms on how water users can achieve the management area goals that will be developed by the council. Next slide. We also came to agreement on many of the required council duties. So this is a focus on the council duties, but make a complete record of the proceedings, which is common sense, coordinate with DWR in creating area goals. Keep in mind that the area goals then essentially will drive what will be in the management plan. And we'll talk about that today, the area goals, what those goals might look like, and then the area plan and what are the components of the plan. And then recommend and send that information to the director, the area goals and plan, and then ADWR will issue a final approval of the goals and portions of the plan to be implemented by DWR. And then, of course, striking anything that's illegal or unconstitutional provisions associated with that plan. Next slide. There was also agreement on other committee consensus, well, where we came to committee consensus on a few key concepts. In general, gathering additional information and data, cooperating with others, and there's a variety listed here, establishing a steering committee, advisory committee, providing the council the tools that they may need to move forward with this plan. And then the council may even have other duties and responsibilities and capabilities that will need to be finalized as we work through the more details following these recommendations. Next slide, please. All council member feedback and comments will be captured at each meeting and posted in the notes. This feedback will be utilized in any further development of the framework details. So I think what's important here, and an item that we'd like to touch upon, is that all of the information that you have provided to us, whether it has been expressed verbally or whether it's been expressed written, has been captured by the department. We're going to continue to utilize that information and go back to that information as we work out the details associated with each of these high-level concepts. We have discussed, and I think we will move forward with providing you a hard copy of all those comments, the verbal comments that have been made at each meeting, including the written comments, so that as we go through the details following the recommendations, you'll have that information so that we can use that information and so that it wasn't overlooked and that we capture all that information as we develop more of the details associated with these concepts. So I just wanted to point that out, that as we go through this process and once we get the recommendations to the governor, there's going to be more work, but all that information has been captured and we'll be sharing all that information with you. Alternative viewpoints of the council members will also be noted for each component and each issue. And there were some alternative viewpoints and they have been shared. And I thought I'd point out what a couple of those alternative viewpoints have been from Senator Kerr and the Farm Bureau, that existing water users should not be subject to any required conservation measures that would reduce the historically acknowledged volumes of water use. And one of the other alternate viewpoints was the designation of the rural groundwater management area and the selection of an area advisory council members should be done only through election. We did not have support for either one of these alternative viewpoints from you as the committee and council members, but we want to make sure that we do acknowledge these alternative viewpoints. Next slide. Are there any questions before I just dive into the meat? Yes, Sharon.
It's not a question, well, it is a question. I'll put it in the form of a question. Sharon Megdal, University of Arizona. I think I've brought this up before, and I still don't see where it's going to be discussed and if this waits till after December. And that is the question of funding. Because there's responsibilities placed on this council that makes it sound like the council is working at somewhat arm's length from the department. But the council is going to be a group of volunteers. And so I have the question about that. And I put it in the form of a question, but I'm also going to make a comment. One of the things that I think is has been somewhat muddled, at least from my point of view in some of the public statements made, is that as I see it, as kind of a newcomer, I'm not a legislative lobbyist, I wasn't involved with any of the formulation of the LGSA. We're now calling it something else. We use that as kind of a bit of a starting point, but I think we've deviated from that. And so the funding that might have been included in the LGSA, I have no idea. Is that a proposal or not a proposal? So I just want to say, I wonder, I have questions about how the local councils will operate, and that relates to funding, and I don't see where we're talking about that. So that's a question I have.
That's a good question, Sharon, and we have not addressed the issue of funding. We've mentioned it briefly. I think that's an issue that's going to have to be addressed. And as we go through these area goals and the area plan, hopefully that will provide us an opportunity to talk in a little bit more detail about how this council will function. But understanding that there's going to be more details that we're going to have to work through.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I just wanted, sometimes it's hard to get things said here, so I'm taking the opportunity of your pausing for a moment. Thank you.
So Sharon, I think from previous conversations you've had on this issue, you're talking about both funding maybe for the council and for DWR to support the council, right? So I'll just say a few things about DWR at least. In the WIFA legislation that required DWR to start looking at the basins and doing supply and demand analyses, we got $3.5 million. Part of that money was also designed to make sure the department was funded for things we have to do in the AMAs or things that we might do in these rural areas for new groundwater. So from that perspective, and in the consideration of the importance of this to the governor, we'll figure out the resources for the department, we'll prioritize, and we'll make the necessary adjustments to our staffing to be able to support what comes out of this process. In terms of the council, I think that's maybe a different issue.
Paul.
A couple comments, Bruce, on slide 16. One is it talks about the need to document current groundwater uses. And last meeting, we had some good discussion, I think, on the importance of historical groundwater use too. So I wonder if that could say current and historical.
We can do that.
Okay. And the other is it talks about the process should be more streamlined than an AMA application process. I just want to throw out the concept, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but kind of, as I see it, the hammer to try to force us to get something done is that the alternative is an AMA. And so I want to throw out the concept that whatever we come up with should be less restrictive than an AMA also, or else that's,
okay.
The AMA is not much of a hammer. So.
And that might be something that we may want to discuss as a council, because potentially council members could establish something that may have requirements that may be more restrictive than an AMA, depending on this unique situation. So that was one of the reasons why we didn't really put that piece in there. And you know, allow the locals and the council members to make the decision on what are the best management plans to address their problem.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I'm just pointing out that if that's the case, it kind of takes away the hammer of the AMA being the alternative.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, can we go to slide 20? Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Yes.
I don't want to distract from moving on to slide 20, but I do at the same time. Slide number 14, where it talks about ADWR to conduct hearing process similar to AMA, INA. Is that one hearing or multiple hearings? I know I've been thinking about that more than once. I think there'd be should be an opportunity for more than one hearing.
So The way it's described is that it would be similar to the AMA or INA process. And I think in statute that requires at least one hearing. There's also it's a very quick process. I believe that 60 days after the hearing, there is a requirement to issue a decision. So we could have more than one hearing, but we'd need to make sure we allow time to take into account any comments submitted at the last hearing.
Thank you.
So Chris, if I could add, this concept doesn't preclude maybe kind of an informal hearing process. So in the Wallapai INA, you might recall that DWR went out and had what I'll describe as an informal hearing process before the director made the decision to start the formal INA proceedings. And that concept is certainly still on the table in regards to any new areas as well. That gave opportunity to folks to weigh in a less formal process and maybe created an opportunity for people to make comments that maybe were less of on the record, so to speak, and hopefully people spoke maybe more freely. And so again, from my perspective, certainly willing to consider that type of informal process as we head into the more formal hearing process that might be required under a new area.
Thank you. I think that's all part of this, I think, the goal of flexibility. And there may be those who can't attend a hearing, but they would need to have that opportunity to provide their comments in some fashion.
Thank you.
Yes, I do think that there would be an opportunity for written comments regardless.
Shall we move on? Could we go?
This is Chairwoman Flores.
Yes, Chairwoman.
Yes, and in the previous slide, and it went so fast, but regarding involving municipalities, cities, townships, tribes, there we go, cooperate. So the discussion still needs to be laid out how the council then will interact with these entities. Is that going to be laid out now or later? How you will cooperate?
As we address the area plan and the area goals, some of that may come out, but I think there's probably going to need to be some more detailed discussion in that area, but I think Patrick may have a comment also.
Thanks,
So,
Bruce.
okay, I just have one question then. So then we'll be able to make comments to that when that is addressed?
Yes.
Okay. And looking down in the future, would this be through ITCA? And that I'll end with that.
Chairwoman, this is Patrick Adams. Thank you for your questions. I think what we're trying to capture here is on a high level, on a kind of a principle level, that this council is going to be making advisory recommendations to the department, and they need to take into account all of the different water users, entities, communities, including tribal nations that are in that area that would be in this groundwater management area. So we're trying to capture that at a high level here. But I think you're right, there's more room to build out the details on maybe what those steps could look like. So while we're working on high level components of the framework right now, if there are suggestions that you might be able to submit to us on when we get down into the details at a later date, how that might look, we would really welcome those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can we go to slide 21, please? Groundwater management goals. As you know, you need a goal overall in order to develop a plan. And so the council will draft and recommend a goal in consultation with DWR and the director issuing final approval of the goal. The goal has to be specified in the plan and also needs to address the particular rural groundwater management area and the situation associated with the resolution that established the rural groundwater management area. The management goals may include as appropriate, and we just listed these. This is from a previous analysis that we did, and so we're just sharing with you. Much of this language came from the LGSA, but we've made some changes to that, and management goals may include as appropriate achieving safe yield, reducing long-term declines, reducing mitigating subsidence, reducing and mitigating water quality degradation or other water management goals developed in consultation. So it's a kind of a catch-all. So we had a few comments to this that I thought I would highlight from a couple of the committee members. From Chris, the local council should be able to tailor goals to fit local needs. Kustis, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Chris K.
Put them next to each other.
The local council should be able to tailor goals to fit local needs, working with DWR and with outline parameters, such as relating to the reason for designation. So Chris, I don't know if you want to make any further comments to your comment. Okay, thank you. And there was also a comment made by Jamie Kelly and Supervisor Langenfelter. Goals must consider impacts to voter-approved municipal and county general plans. Safe yield may not be possible in some areas, but goals should consider protection and sustainability of access to water for vulnerable populations. So, Jamie, I'll open it up to you if you'd like to add any further explanation on that.
We're just looking for the ability to balance the uses, that one sector's use would not adversely impact another's. We have a lot of small users, residents that need some protection.
Okay, thank you. I have a question on the county general plans. Can you kind of explain what the situation is there?
It's long and complicated, and I'm probably more familiar with the city's plans, but the counties have comprehensive plans and the cities have general plans, and every 10 years they're obligated under statute to plan out the future growth of the county or the town, city, as the case may be. And of importance to this committee is they have to take into account the water needs necessary to meet those plans, to fulfill their build-out plans and the property uses. And we believe that there should be a bit more more close relation between the components of those plans and the water management tools available. Okay. Once the plan, there's a public hearing process to develop that plan. Because of all of these issues that need to be addressed by statute, they're quite large. But the counties, I know, have a series of public hearings on the plans as a part of the process to obtain resident input, and it's easier for cities because it's more centrally located.
So this sounds like an item that we're going to have to talk about in a little bit more detail as we move forward.
It is, and I bet you Craig Sullivan can tell you about the process to adopt the plan more than I can.
You've done it very well, and we can provide some additional information on this, but it really is it is a visioning document, and it identifies water resources, but it's not a tool necessarily, I think, to promote conservation or achieve goals. Now, it could be certainly linked to that.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Thank you, Bruce. And of course, very supportive of reducing and mitigating water quality degradation. What I really wanted to share with all of the members of the committee is the role that DEQ plays in this regard. So state law requires DEQ to conduct ambient groundwater monitoring for groundwater quality monitoring throughout the state. And so we do that in each of the basins that we're talking about in these rural areas. It's not been as robust as needed, and we're working on that, but we do have data and are building more data as we go regarding the groundwater quality in each of these groundwater basins. Of course, state law also designates the basins, all of the groundwater in Arizona, for drinking water purposes. We have programs such as the Aquifer Protection Permit Program to prevent groundwater quality degradation. We also have the Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund designed to address contamination of groundwater that makes it unfit for that designated use. And so as the councils are considering goals, as the community is understanding the nature of groundwater pumping, it's important that the council understand the context with respect to groundwater quality. As aquifer levels decline, groundwater quality tends to decline as well. And so I am grateful for this being acknowledged. I hope that the council will be, I would like the opportunity for DEQ to present that data to the councils. I would like them to understand and take that into account, understand whether there are, for example, wharf sites within the basin that need to be accounted for, and so on. So this is terrific. I support it. I just didn't understand necessarily the extent to which the council knows about the work that we do in these basins, and so I wanted to point that out. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Karen.
Bruce, if I could
Yes.
add back to the
Yes,
planned
Jamie.
comment, the comprehensive and general plans, is they're voted on by the residents. And that seems to be an important concept to some of the council members. So the residents do have the ability to participate in the process, provide input, and then thumbs up or thumbs down it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Sharon.
I have a question for Jamie and the comment that you read about vulnerable populations. Is that on this handout that we have? Because I'm not reading fast enough to find it.
It's in the one behind mine. It's in the comments submitted by Supervisor Lingenfelter.
Maybe you could just tell us where it is on this, because we can't all speed read and find it. The point or the question I have is, unlike some states, we, best I can tell, in our water management and objectives, we don't have a concept of disadvantaged communities or vulnerable populations. And I don't know what the definition of vulnerable population would be. And the way you described it, I almost heard it like, well, it could be residents, that you wouldn't necessarily want to disadvantage residents by another sector's water use. So I just want to know if we end up using anything like vulnerable populations, I think we need to understand what we mean by that. And so that's why I bring it up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jamie.
I think it would go back to we're environmental justice communities. I'm more familiar with the federal terms than the state terms, and that they have been deemed disadvantaged economic zones.
Okay, thank you.
Poverty rate.
So Karen, I guess I'll follow up with you. Were you offering to present some information regarding water quality to the council?
To the councils, I think DEQ plays a role and it could be very beneficial to the council to have that context.
Thank you.
The Rural Groundwater Management Area Council, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. You have the committee.
Not this council.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So,
you.
Bruce, can I make a comment?
Sure.
One of the
course.
things I'm hearing is that we have entities like the counties and the cities who are already engaging in a regional planning, local planning process that takes into account water, is thinking about water, thinking about communities' needs with water. We also have state agencies that are doing good work, monitoring the water quality in an area. So if we could go back to slide 18, so 3 slides back, it seems like there's a desire from this group to have, when an advisory council in a groundwater management area is thinking about its area goal and thinking about its area plan, it's really important for that second point, the cooperation with tribes, cities, towns, counties, and other, including public agencies, to engage in that planning. So it seems like that is really an important point to capture what the comments we've just been hearing about. There are good ongoing local and state planning that's happening, and that needs to be part of this council's work when they're developing their plan and their goal.
Agreed.
So I'm wondering do we think that this item number 2 here kind of captures that desire we've been hearing for committee members. Do we want to add that sort of maybe when something in there about when they're creating their plan and their goal, they should factor in their cooperation with local entities? Is that, maybe that's a way to get at it from this high-level principled framework approach that we're pursuing? And that would also capture, work that irrigation districts, municipal water districts are doing as well.
So building upon that, Patrick, and this is, I guess, for Chairwoman Flores and maybe Jay, I'm familiar sometimes with some of the tribal planning tools and documents that they create in Katasha, but certainly not all, and I think it would be helpful, much like Jamie's talked about the local plans, the county plans, et cetera, if you could help me at least understand what some of those tribal plans are and how they might play into what we're trying to do collectively in that area. And it probably gets Chairwoman Flores to some of what you talked about earlier and some of the details about how this interaction with the tribes might be constructed.
This is Jay with ITCA. I think, each tribe, we have 22 tribes in the state, they're all sovereigns and they all do things a little differently than each other. Of course, there's certain federal requirements they have to follow. I think because of the nature of each tribe and their unique circumstances, that type of coordination would best be done in a formal sovereign-to-sovereign consultation where they could bring, the tribe could bring their information and consult with ADWR and see where that interaction would be. I think it'd be probably, and I'll defer to the chairwoman and to Katasha about their individual tribes and how they might be able to do it, but I could also see some tribes maybe being a little more hesitant to share too much information without knowing what that's going to be used for. So in a consultation where there's a planned discussion, I think that would probably be a more fruitful discussion, but I'll defer to the chairwoman and to Katasha.
Thank you, Jay. This is Chairwoman Flores. Yes, I think as this plan is being developed, the recommendations, and we're talking about the high level framework right now, that we cannot leave these entities off, especially tribes. We cannot leave them off because we're painting the whole picture of the state of Arizona in this groundwater. We also need to include tribal nations, whether the tribes want to share their water sources, their groundwater, their wells and everything. That's up to them individually. We're all unique, as you all know. So, but if we have that opportunity to have some input in the get-go, I think it would be well receptive now rather than later. And the reason why I brought up ITCA, I don't know if that's a channel or now deciding the details out now as to how we're going to approach this, how the groundwater committee is going to approach it. It cannot be left for later. And that's my recommendation to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I'll reach out. Maria and I will reach out offline to you and the other tribes, and maybe Bruce, we can organize a meeting, one of the side meetings you're discussing, to maybe flesh that out a little further.
Thank you. Katasha.
Yes, I will just say that for the community, it of course is in Pinal County, so it's not located in the particular areas in which you were looking at. But to this point about ITCA versus consultation, I will also say from a policy perspective, I think you might get a broad, general, good consensus of the tribes working through ITCA. But I second what Jay said earlier about individual tribal consultation. because while that is challenging and cumbersome and takes some time to do, it will give you much more solid information in which to work in these local planning areas. Because in that construct, you can work on things like non-disclosure agreements that will make tribes more comfortable, sharing information that's going to be relevant and important. And I think, without knowing, that tribes would be much more interested in sharing in requirements on the state to get information to work with them, because as you work on statewide planning and state water resources that are shared in many respects, you need to know what tribes are doing and think about those sorts of things. So tribes would be more willing to engage with you if they have some guarantees of protections to that information while you're thinking about things. But simultaneously, they will repeatedly want to reiterate, which I will do now, and I think the chairman has said this and Jay has said this a couple of times, the state law isn't necessarily applicable to them, so they don't have to comply. But what you're doing here and the council is doing is important from a statewide perspective for you to know what's happening on the grounds in those communities.
Thank you, Katasha. Representative Travers.
Just at the risk of getting bogged down in semantics, should we change to consult as to cooperate? Should we? Just for this purpose.
I'll ask.
Because Jay used console like 5 times in his sentence. So I think we should change it.
So I will say they're two different concepts. So, I mean, that is a question worth considering.
Is it an and?
So a consultation is more of a legal construct where you are doing specific one-on-one discussions that bring with it various legal requirements, versus collaboration can be more of a wide open discussion. Mm-hmm. So if you change it, you will be changing the connotation potentially.
I don't want to hog the mic here, but he kept using the word consultation, and I was thinking it in the non-legal way, but we've got the lawyers here, so I'm going to defer to the lawyers. If they think consult is not the good word, I'm going to go with what Katasha says.
Yeah.
Jay,
Consultation is a term of art in Indian law, and really fundamentally what it requires is in the policy development process. So I think in this case, when ADWR, as the representative of the state government, is engaged in the policy process, the tribe should have an opportunity to be heard and to impact that decision-making process. So it's not anything more than a deeper conversation, but because it is a formal engagement between governments, as Katasha said, there's the opportunity for more protections, more comfort to be on the side of the tribe to understand that process, because it's the process that they've engaged with in the state on a lot of things in formal consultation, but that they interact with the federal government on frequently. So tribes understand what consultation means to the tribe. And so that formal process will bring a lot more comfort in sharing that information.
Jamie.
This is a bouncing ball. What are we going to be consulting on? Is it actually the area goals, the management plan, or the creation of the area?
Nicole.
No, I think it.
Just to clarify, this is a list of potential council duties, and I think it might be better described as authorities. So like in the statutes, you'll typically have an enabling statute that says the council shall do these things, and then the council may do this other list of things. And I think this is the council may list. So this is, and again, this is the council, this is not ADWR. So we should be really clear about what we're asking the council to do or obligating the council to do, and then what we're authorizing the director to do and obligating the director to do. Because I'm hearing different things about whether the council should be involved or whether the director of ADWR should be involved too, as well as the, the shall and the may. So.
I have a question. I think it is of importance, particularly in shared aquifers. And I sense that the sovereign nations would prefer to confer directly with the director, which means your area council would have already taken some type of action to put something together for consideration. And I'm going to assume that if it's objectionable, it's going to get kicked back down. So I understand the concern to flesh it out, but I'm not sure that we have enough time to get there, if that makes sense, because there's a lot of nuances to it.
So maybe I take responsibility for taking us back to slide 18 when we were on slide 21 earlier. But I think, you know, Katasha and Jay have clarified this for us. The council is not a sovereign entity. So I think when we talk about consultation with a capital C, that is not happening with this particular council. That is more in the realm, as Jamie just mentioned, when the director is involved with making decisions. So I think where we kind of started this conversation is this council is making recommendations. It's coming up with water management practices. It's kind of trying to chart a course for what this local area should be heading towards. And when it does that, when it does the area goal, when it does the area plan, it should be cooperating and collaborating and consulting, lowercase c, with local entities and tribes. And it should do that in a way that gives tribes flexibility, in particular, so it can be a cooperation one-on-one, or maybe through an organization like ITCA. That should be the tribes should have the flexibility in how they engage in that particular cooperation. So I think the first thing I think we want to really hone back in on is, do we think when the council is developing its area goals and developing its area plans, cooperation and coordination with all of these local entities and the efforts they're already engaged on should be part of that process? Do we need to add language in here that says, in the area plan and goal section, or in this section that says, when developing the area plan or goal, or in the area plan or goal section say, include the coordination with local entities, essentially, to capture that high level?
Sure.
Patrick, Sharon Megdal, I think what you just said was really important when developing, because from discussions I've been involved in with indigenous communities globally, what they're asking for is to be brought in early, and I believe Chairwoman Flores may have said that, rather than have something already developed and then just put on them, please react. So I liked you're using the words when developing, or whatever the right words would be, and whatever C word we use, I'll defer to the lawyers.
Jay.
And if I could just make a suggestion to Patrick's point on the one-pager, not on the slides, but on the one-pager, this line of cooperating with tribes and cities and towns, et cetera, is listed under optional duties. If we're going to emphasize that, perhaps that should be moved to required duties of the council.
I agree. Agreed. We'll make that change. Should we, am I hearing too that we may need to bolster that number 2? We'll bolster. Now, would you like us to take a shot at that, or would any of you like to take a shot at that? Okay, we can do, Trent's been over here rapidly taking notes. Are you also thinking that we may need a separate line item for tribes?
I think it'd be helpful because of the special relationship of tribes with the state, that should be built out. And maybe in terms of processes, as the chairwoman noted, maybe we can circle up as the tribes that are on this, as well as ITCA, to put some language together.
So as part of our meeting, separate meeting, maybe we can develop what that looks like. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Jay.
This is Madam Chairwoman Flores. I agree with Jay that it'd be a separate number 1, number 2. Keep it up there, that it's not an afterthought, that this committee's not doing it as an afterthought. Initially, the tribe was in here, whether it be cooperation. I know our tribe likes to do consultation because we like to document on record, on our records, so that, you know, when we do meet with these outside entities, especially the state or the federal government. So, but that's incumbent upon each tribe, and I can't speak for each tribe, only for CRIP. Thank you for my comments.
Thank you. So, Patrick, go ahead.
So let's go to slide 22. So we had the goals. This is kind of a zoomed out version. I think maybe I think kind of what I'm hearing is in the development, in the early stages of developing a goal, the council should engage in that cooperation with local, public, state, and sovereign entities. And I think that's something we should probably add to this.
We can do that.
From the discussion I'm hearing from the committee.
Tom.
Yeah, hey, just wanted to, so Tom Torres with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. One of the things that one of the groups that we may want to include in that is the other federal agencies. You know, in the state of Arizona, over 20 million acres are managed at the surface, at least by Department of Interior, BLM, Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service, and their managed lands, you know, overlap a lot of the areas that we're talking about. And I can tell you from experience, because at the department, we coordinate a lot with the federal agencies in watershed health, which has direct correlation to groundwater in terms of acceptance and that kind of stuff. So, and I can tell you that the federal agencies have land management plans that talk to watershed health, which is again directly related to groundwater. So I would recommend that we include reference to the federal agencies in how we coordinate with them. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Good point. Thanks, Tom. Chris.
Chris Udall, Agribusiness Water Council. Along with what you're saying, Director Torres, would that behoove us to include permittees?
Well, the permittees have permits through the federal agencies, so you know, I would assume that they would have a variety of venues to provide input, either as, you know, citizens within the county or as permittees through the federal government. So I'm not sure how they would be included.
So I think permittees could be entities that are water users, local districts, et cetera. And I think we're capturing that in this high-level description of tribes, cities, towns, counties, other public or private agencies. Public agencies would be irrigation districts, and other local private agencies would be, capture the non-district. So maybe having that broad scope and capturing that the goal should be developed with cooperation and input from all those different groups would capture this desire from the committee here today to essentially, when you're creating a goal for a rural groundwater management area, you should listen to all those who are in the area, right? I mean, that's what we're getting at, right?
So this is the high level, as Patrick mentioned, the key concept, adding a statement regarding working together with other organizations, federal government, cities, towns, tribes, et cetera. If we add a bullet point like that and send it out to everyone, can you agree with what we have drafted here to date, including this new bullet item that we're going to have to draft? But are we good with what we have here so far? And then we can send out a redraft of this maybe in a couple of days associated with this key concept.
I was going to go back to the general plan discussion a little bit, and just, I realize there are public meetings and public documents and they're voted on. I'm curious if you could just give me a perspective on how they handle agricultural use. I think of them more as defining industrial, municipal, residential, but I know agriculture is part of the zoning they recommend too. But if we're looking at those as a planning tool that feeds into this process, how would you characterize the input and the engagement of agriculture in those?
Jamie Kelly, Mojave County Water Authority. I'm not sure there's much. I'm going to loop Craig into this discussion because I don't know that the counties have zoning authority over ag. So it's really hard to plan for anything if you don't have the ability to regulate. They're not going to expend their resources that way. I mean, and it's probably something that's missing from those plans. From a city standpoint, they don't at all because there's not ag in most of the cities. Craig, do you know?
Yeah, I'll just add, Craig Sullivan, County Supervisors Association. It's a good question, but Jamie, you're correct. They don't have that authority over ag. And I think what it leads me to is I want to do a little bit of a scrub. Remember, these things come around every 10 years. Let me do a little bit of a scrub of some of the county plans and see what that nexus is and the robustness of the stakeholder outreach, and provide a little bit more detailed information to you all to support that. Hadn't done that in anticipation of this meeting, so I'd be happy to do that for the group, though. That's a good question.
That's good. Just in the interest of, I think, staying at the right level and the interest of compromise, I don't know if we should be saying the goal should be tied to the ambient groundwater monitoring study that ADEQ has done in that area. But the goal should have input from ADEQ who can feed that study in. So maybe having the goal receive input from the county is a way for the county to feed in their planning and general planning, et cetera, without necessarily statutorily tying the two together, but creating that pathway for it to be used in that development. At least for this high-level concept that we're trying to get to right here.
Chris Kay.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So maybe one way to think about doing that on this slide, thinking what Jamie said, and then Paul, would be another bullet, something like the goal should consider general plans and comprehensive plans, and then something that could reflect infrastructure investments, or that would be relevant for irrigation districts, something to that effect, so that it's not necessarily tied, but it is something that should be considered in the development of the goal, and that's identified.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, Chris, you.
And that works out good. And maybe not just irrigation districts, because I know in a lot of the rural areas, it's ditch companies.
Okay.
And then maybe that should be an inclusion.
Thank you. We'll work on drafting some language for this. Okay. But we good with the other 3 bullet items, or 4? Yes. Okay. Can we move on? Let's move on to the area plan. Okay, and required components associated with the area plan. Draft and recommend a plan for a groundwater program of policies that protects the local economy by sustainably managing groundwater resources within the area, and the plan shall include 1 or more management goals for the area approved by the director, a description of and we remove the specifics, hydrologic, geologic, ecological, and demographic, and just tried to make it a little broader in general. A description of the appropriate physical and socioeconomic characteristics and conditions in the area and how the goals relate to those conditions. Proposed actions consistent with achieving the goals, and then methods to monitor and report on progress toward the goals. So these would be required components that would be in the area plan itself. And so I'm interested in any of your comments or suggestions. Now, I will read some comments, committee comments that were made by others. Chris Kay, in addition to the 1 or more area goals, an area plan should include description of local conditions that relate to the reason for area designation and the goals, proposed actions that would be consistent with meeting area goals, and means or methods to track progress toward goals. Is there anything that within this slide, Chris, that is in conflict with your comment?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. And then Abe Springer had made a comment, and I believe Abe's online. A description of the range of long-term natural variability of hydrologic conditions in the area and how the goals relate to those conditions. Abe, would you like to add anything further to your comment?
Bruce, that was just to recognize that these systems do experience natural variability as well, and to make sure that's incorporated in the understanding of the response. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the committee? Sharon?
Yeah, I have a comment about the lead-in sentence, the first sentence on the slide. And I'm not sure if where this language actually came from, but I don't know that, first of all, I keep getting into definitions. Remember, I'm a professor, I grade things, I look at words and so forth, so forgive me for being picky on that. But I don't know if we have a definition of what sustainably managing groundwater resources is in an area that's not an AMA and whatever. So I have an alternative to suggest that protects the sustainability of the local economy by managing groundwater. And I want to say I've dealt with this on a USDA funded project I'm on with California, where they want to talk about sustainable groundwater use by agriculture in California, where they have surface water. We're looking at the Pinal AMA, and you're not going to talk about sustainable use of groundwater in the AMA, but you can talk about sustaining the agricultural economy. And so I don't know if that's the perfect wording, but I do have that concern about what does that mean and could you ever achieve it?
So could you read through then what your change would be again?
Well, what I very quickly wrote down, and I'm not wedded to this at all, but it says the council shall draft and recommend a plan for groundwater program and policies that protects the sustainability of the local economy by managing groundwater resources with the area. So it kind of moves the concept of sustainability to the economy as opposed to the groundwater use.
Thank you. Comments from committee members on the wording change? Yes, Chris.
There might be some legislative intent language to look at in the Groundwater Management Act that talks about that, protecting local economy, and that maybe you could incorporate. That kind of gets at, I think, what Sharon is getting at. So local economy, well-being, things like that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm okay with making that change if you're all okay with making the change that Sharon has suggested, and then Chris will do some investigative work based off your comment. Tom?
So in that first line where it says, where protects is, I would insert the sustainability of before the local economy and delete the word sustainably in that second line. We're not doing actual red line on a screen, but that's what I suggested.
One additional comment, Bruce.
Yes, Chris.
Chris K this time, and then maybe Chris, you will go next. So the sustainability of the local economy and something to the effect of the well-being of local communities. So to ensure economy and communities go together. Thumbs up, Sharon? Okay.
Okay. And well-being of local communities after sustainable economy.
This is Madam Chair. I have Flores, I have a question when you're ready.
Yes, Chairwoman, go ahead.
Okay, so you're striking out the hydrological and geologic, ecological, you're striking that out. So why, might have missed from the last meeting, but why are we taking that out? And then how will those issues be addressed?
The thought was that the physical characteristics are all encompassing for hydrologic, geologic, ecological. And in case we left anything else off, we felt that physical was broad enough that it would capture all those elements. Again, this is at very, very high level.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have a new phrase? Can you read it back to us, Trent, or do you have, or I guess I could try to, or Sharon, do you have? No, I'm not doing that one. Okay.
All right, I think I've got it to the council shall draft and recommend a plan for groundwater program and policies that protects the sustainability of the local economy and well-being of local communities by managing groundwater resources within the area.
Sounds good to me. Committee okay with that? Okay, thank you. Any more comments before we move on? Required components. Yes, Tom.
So Bruce, just thinking about the components of a plan, and given the conversation that we had earlier about all those regional land management plans or county plans or whatever, I would think that having a summary of the relevant planning documents and plans that are within the area might be good to have a summary in there. That way everybody's aware of those other sort of competing interests, if you will. So just a comment.
Or plans that you may need to be consistent with, or that may have, okay.
Or may have roadblocks or things like that.
Okay. Thank you. I like.
Did Abe feel like, Abe, did you feel like you got your comment answered or replied to?
Mike.
Abe, do you feel like you got your comment answered or replied to?
I'm still not sure we incorporate conditions other than human-created conditions. So there are natural fluctuations in conditions.
And, you know, Abe, I agree with you. And the appropriate physical item, and we've taken note of this natural variability, so that will be part of that detail component of what we mean by appropriate physical. So yes, we will capture it. I don't think we necessarily need to capture it in this document, but yes, it will be captured in more of the details as we work out the details associated with these recommendations.
Great, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Okay, we go to the next slide. Required program actions. Actions for implementation by DWR shall include requiring groundwater measuring and annual reporting for non-exempt wells in the area, adoption of rules governing the location of new and replacement wells, and the implementation of mandatory water conservation programs. We have a comment from the committee from Chris Kay. If an area will include existing water user acknowledgements, those should also be automatically paired with measuring and reporting in a conservation program in the management plan.
So Bruce, what I'm seeing from this slide, the local advisory council is going to put together a plan, and there are some things that need to be in the plan. Measurement and reporting of water use for large wells, rules about where new and replacement wells should go, and some conservation program. But there's a lot of flexibility here, right? Again, when we talk about measurement of groundwater use, it doesn't necessarily require a meter, right? The department accepts many forms of ways to capture measurement. There's flexibility about what the rules this could include, and then there's a lot of flexibility about who and how and what type of conservation can be achieved. So I see these as kind of like just some good solid umbrella programs that should probably be included in any area plan. that a good
Yes.
interpretation of the slide?
Yeah. And I think these are also actions that have been discussed by the committee on over and over again over the last few months. Yes, Paul.
Just to clarify, I guess that the flexibility on groundwater measuring, we've had quite a bit of discussion here and offline about whether that's metering or modeling or imaging or whatever, and that all falls within that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Chris, you.
I would echo what Paul said and have that include Open ET, the concept of Open ET ASMET that's used pretty heavily for the last 30 or so years at U of A, and other similar approaches to measuring and monitoring.
Okay.
Chris, we'll capture that point that in the umbrella of measurement,
Yes.
OpenET is a tool for that.
You'll see that in the presentation today and when we talk about measuring and reporting.
Yes, just wanted to include ASMET because one of my board members who's actively involved in agronomy said that that's another good way to probably actually connect it to OpenET to get a better record.
Does everyone know what ASMET is? You want to explain, Chris, what that is, or Paul?
ASMET is a network of meteorological stations around the state that the University of Arizona maintains and gives local, real-time, and historical data on a lot of different components of meteorology and the weather.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? As part of the area plan, here are some potentially proposed actions that ADWR could implement. So it could include prohibit or otherwise limit the expansion of groundwater use, funding voluntary compensated land and water conservation plans with actions to be implemented by landowners and water users. And these are, you are very familiar with many of these programs and plans, but again, these are proposed actions that DWR could take. Short or long-term voluntary land use or water use agreements with landowners and water users, recharge activities, low water use development incentives, incentives for low water use practices, fixtures, et cetera, irrigation efficiency and conservation incentives. So these are just examples of some proposed actions that could be part of this plan that ADWR could implement. So any thoughts? Haley?
Yeah, just to clarify, so these are things that the council could choose for DWR to implement. I just wanted to kind of just get that distinction.
I think as we go through the details, yes, exactly. Now, we did have a couple of comments from Chris K. A menu of options, actions that could be included in the area plan is either requests or recommendations that are based on existing authorities should be defined, which I think is a good point. The council should have the ability to either make requests to DWR or make recommendations to relevant local jurisdictions, such as counties, cities and towns, and water utilities. The actions must be approved by the relevant implementing jurisdiction through its standard public process. Would you like to add anything further to that comment, Chris?
So I think the comment on the local jurisdictions reflects one of the values of the equitable application of the program and taking an all-hands approach to the sectors that would be in a basin area. And so by using existing authorities, if that local jurisdiction were to do something in, like, say, their general plan that could relate to the goal of one of these basins, that also could potentially open up funding for that activity, for that incentive, for example. So trying to tie in everything towards working towards a basin level goal.
Okay.
Bruce, do we have some on the next slide, something maybe along those lines?
We have, yeah, one we, yeah, I think we do, yes. The plan may include actions recommended by the council for implementation by cities, towns, counties, or other public agencies within the area boundaries. Recommendations to county and municipal governments and water utilities to incentivize or require water conservation and management of water resources. A plan for recharge, storage, and recovery to improve aquifer conditions. Recommend best management practices or other actions deemed appropriate by the council to achieve the goal. So I think that covers part of what you're discussing, Chris. You had also provided a comment. It's the same? Okay, good. So we're good. It's the same comment. Okay. Thank you, Trent.
So these, we've just looked at 3 slides. A slide of like, okay, the plan should include these 3 basic items, which the committee's talked about a lot. Another menu of items that DWR could implement at the recommendation of the area council. And then this 3rd slide is the council having taken input from all these other entities. It could include recommendations for complementary programs from other local jurisdictions, programs related to recharge, BMPs, et cetera. So is that...
It is, and I guess I would ask the committee, is there anything that obvious that we've left off that you think should be added? Sharon?
This may seem obvious, but we don't anywhere say it needs to include a map of the area. And we have acknowledged that there might be large basin that might have more than one, or maybe a subset of it being a rural groundwater management area. So it may be obvious, but I think it would be nice to have a map on the boundaries.
I'm thinking that would be associated with the physical characteristics, but yes, a map would be important. Yeah, agreed. These are more action-oriented? Yeah.
Well, I know. I mean, I may be out of turn,
Mhm.
but it just occurred to me that having a map would be really nice, and maps aren't always provided.
Yep.
But they're easy these days, aren't they?
Yes, thank you.
So let's see if...
Haley.
Go ahead, Haley.
Oh, I was just thinking with that 3rd slide, 27, as well as the previous one, kind of back to Sharon's funding comment. And so I think it's important that if communities are going to take the step to, apply a new option to manage their groundwater, the more we can incentivize and encourage and give them resources that they get if they do this. I don't know how we incorporate that, but I just don't want to lose that thread of
The
you get
funding and
special,
the incentives.
you get special treatment if you do take this action, and you're encouraged, and we have funding for you to take these really awesome voluntary, in your list of options, you're going to be able to cover those costs or some sort of coverage of those costs. So just want to flag that.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, that's a great dovetail off of Sharon's, what's called her Director Megdal, WRC Director, Dr. Megdal. That's a great dovetail off Sharon's earlier points about funding that we'll come back to that, but funding to have the technical resources to put one of these together, whether that's through DWR or through the council, and then funding for implementation. Once we have a plan, how do we execute? So thank you for that comment, Haley.
Thank you. So, area plan key concepts. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
one more comment, Bruce. On slide 26, the first bullet, prohibit or otherwise limit the expansion of groundwater use. It might be worth adding another phrase to that, something like, and allowing for mitigation or offsets, so that it's not a pause necessarily on doing new things, starting new businesses, growth in the basin. There would be mechanisms to do that. It would require stability in groundwater use.
Thank you. Got it. Any other thoughts or suggestions from the committee? So let's move to the next slide. Area plan key concepts. Again, this is high level. Hopefully we can get agreement on these items. The plan shall include one or more management goals for the area approved by the director, a description of the appropriate physical and social economic conditions in the area, and how the goal or goals relate to those conditions, methods to monitor and report on the progress, measuring and annual reporting for non-exempt wells, those rules governing well location, and mandatory water conservation programs. The plan may include any other actions deemed appropriate by the council for achieving the goal or goals with approval in coordination with DWR or other entities. And then recommended, not mandated, supplemental water conservation and management programs for implementation by cities, towns, counties, and other public agencies. Yes, Jay.
So just one thought on our earlier conversation. It seems to me this slide is sort of forward-looking reporting, and right, that's how the council is going to operate after the plan is approved. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think that's a component of it. Yes, definitely.
So maybe we should include in this some discussion of ongoing outreach to tribes for sure, but maybe also those state and federal entities, some sort of outreach plan for the council to continue that engagement.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments from the rest of the committee on that suggestion? Yes, Jamie.
Jamie Kelly, Mojave County Water Authority. I have a question on the last bullet point on slide 28. Recommended supplemental water conservation and management programs for implementation. Again, I think we might pick some of that up if we look at the comprehensive and the general plans. We don't want to create a situation of duplication of effort or a potential for conflict.
Okay.
That's good, Jamie. I think this interaction between this advisory council that's looking at a basin to manage groundwater and how they're engaging and coordinating with other ongoing entities, local, federal, tribal, private, that's a theme that we've heard a lot about today in this committee. And so finding that right engagement and meshing, that'll be an important thing for this council to do.
Yes, Sharon.
Just a question as I look over this. We've been talking about public agencies, and I realize this is supplemental, but are we recognizing private water companies? Or are we going to use the terminology of municipal water providers, which includes private water companies? But when we talk about public agencies, those are not private water companies. And so we do need to make sure that we recognize the role of privately operated water companies.
We can add the.
What if we put water users into that list so that we captured the gamut? Because you might have a water user who's not served by a utility or water company, and if it's just a recommended conservation program, they're not bound to anything, but I think you're right that we need to broaden that scope.
Well, and in general, I just think let's not forget about the private water companies as we go through all of this. So just like a check on the language to make sure we're somehow not forgetting them. And I've thought about water users. I thought about that earlier in one of the other conversations on that side of the table. And some entities consider themselves water suppliers and not water users. So we just want to make sure that we're including who we want. That's all.
So I'm hearing we add private water companies to this list under the last bullet item.
And anywhere else it needs to be.
Okay, thank you.
We could use maybe water provider.
Yeah, nice water providers. Okay.
Chairwoman.
Not necessarily CAP or SRP, right? Because they're a different kind of wholesaler, right? So.
And they're not in one of these basins.
Yeah, so it goes to the lawyers too, I think, to worry about the wording on these things. I look at Nicole here.
Chairwoman, were you going to make a comment or a question?
Yes, thank you. Going back to Jay's comment about adding tribes, tribal nations, but I think the council, and this may be late in the game for me to make this comment, but you know, when we consider the high level, when we're setting these goals and the plan in this, but we need to keep in mind how this process impacts tribal lands or tribal water use, and then how it's going to impact tribal water rights. Just to keep, I think that has to be a priority with this committee and also with the council. You know, we've got to keep that in mind, keep that on top of you know, our, what do I want to say, not priorities, but just keep that in mind as we go through the method and the madness of creating these recommendations. Because again, you know, we're part of the state of Arizona. We're separate entities, but you know, we're part of this, and I think that's a statement that we need to keep, you know, in our minds as we go through this. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm thinking, we've definitely noted your comment, and when we have our separate meeting together with the tribes, that's an item that we're going to want to address and make sure that we capture it within. Okay, thank you. Chris? Chris Paul, sorry.
Thank you.
You both have glasses.
All B, please. Back on slide 26, where it says prohibit or otherwise limit the expansion of groundwater use, I know one of the concerns from agriculture was just some flexibility within not expanding groundwater use. So I don't really have a problem with that phrase, but somewhere are we capturing the idea of some flexibility that if a farmer wanted to initiate new vineyards in lieu of something else that they were doing?
Yeah, I think those elements have been captured in all our notes, and as we go through the details and how you might implement this, I think those are all great options that need to be pursued or could be pursued within these basins. So, but when we get into the details, we'll make sure that we capture those pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So what I heard, we're going to add some ongoing outreach to one of these area plan key concepts. But are we okay with the rest of these bullet items as a committee? Yes, Chris, you.
Just to confirm, item or bullet 4, I assume that's under that big umbrella flexibility for ag. Slide 28.
Measuring and annual reporting for non-exempt wells. Is that the one that you're talking about? Yeah, the department, yeah, it would be within the department requirements of what measuring and reporting. And we'll discuss that if we have time today. If not, we'll definitely discuss that at the next meeting. Okay. Chris, okay.
I just want to go after Chris Yu. But so to Jamie's point on the last bullet here, recommended supplemental water conservation and management programs, I think to avoid potential for duplication of what already exists at local jurisdictions, maybe changing management programs to actions. So recommended supplemental water conservation actions.
Comments from the committee? Okay with that? Good, okay. We'll make that change.
DWR's done a valiant effort to summarize those past 3 slides into one. So do we feel like this is a high enough, am I seeing some nods that this is a high enough level that captures those concepts? I'm seeing a lot of physical emotes of agreement around the table for those who are online.
Thanks, Chris. Let's move on. Council membership. Next slide, please. If you recall, this was an item that we've discussed in quite a bit of detail at previous meetings, but this is a proposal that the department has drafted, and so we very, very much want to receive your input, suggested on council members and the makeup of the council. administered by a council of 5 members, and at least 4 of the 5 members must reside within the rural groundwater management area boundaries. 1 person represents ag, 1 represents industrial groundwater users, 1 person represents municipal or residential groundwater user. There are 2 at-large members who reside within the area boundaries. And if an end user of the types described above does not exist, for instance, if there is an industrial user within the boundaries of the area, an additional at-large member shall be appointed. We do have comments from Chris Kay. A bipartisan and balanced council member selection process that includes 4 seats appointed by legislative leadership, 1 appointment each by the Speaker, Senate President, Senate and House Majority Leaders, 3 appointments by the Governor, and 2 appointments by County Board of Supervisors. I think what we'll do is we'll address this on the next slide because we talk about appointments. And then from Jamie Kelly, should provide 1 seat to a county representative and 1 seat to a city representative. Representation by water sector could have issues. 5 is too few members for most counties. We could consider county population for the council size. And then all members should live in the area. So I guess, Jamie, I'd ask if there's any further comment you'd like to make to your comments.
No, I just think it's really important that there be the county representative and the city representative because you're looking to them for a lot of the enforcement, and whatever the water council does, the advisory council does, is going to necessarily impact the cities and the county going forward. We need something that's workable.
Okay. Thank you.
Bruce, could I make a comment, please? This is Abe.
Yes, Abe.
I apologize I didn't get you this information before the meeting, but we had one of our teams at the university make an analysis at the county level of the percentage of total groundwater used for irrigation in every county within the state. And at least 3 counties have less than 10% of the groundwater used for irrigation, and 2 have less than 2% of their water used for irrigation. So I think it would be appropriate if there was some flexibility in this committee makeup that some of these sectors may not be appropriate to be on the councils in basins within some of the counties within the state. And specifically, I gave you data on agricultural use. For Apache and Coconino County, there is essentially no irrigated agriculture with groundwater in those 2 counties.
Thank you, Abe. If you look at the last bullet item, we tried to capture that there, but if that doesn't do it, let us know if you have any suggestions on revisions associated with that last bullet. Could I make a suggestion? Because I think we have like 12 minutes left. Could I make a suggestion that we go to slide 32, and this is the high-level council membership key concepts. And if we could look at this and come to some level of agreement, I know there's some details that still need to be worked out. And if we need to come back to this, we can come back to this at our next committee meeting. But what I'd like to do is maybe review this and see if there's general agreement on what we have here. If not, of course, we can always come back to this. Yes, Sharon.
With due respect, I don't think you can talk about slide 32. Is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
Until you resolve some of the issues of slide 30, like the number of members. And I happen to agree it should be more than 5. I happen to agree that the people should live there in the boundaries, which I think Jamie said. But I don't know that you can get into some of that other slide without that. So maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Well, if you look at, it's pretty high level, the council member key concepts. Council members, no more than 1 member may reside outside the area boundary. Members should represent all major water use sectors within the area. Council must include some number of at-large members to meet the specific needs of the local economy, population, water users, relevant sectors. And then the appointment process. There aren't any necessarily numbers here associated with the number of council members. You know, this is something that we can revisit if you all feel more comfortable, if we need to revisit this at another meeting.
Okay, I have one other comment, just a general comment. When we were talking about the council, again, it's a wording thing. Some people are using the word advisory, and I see these councils having more responsibilities than the groundwater users advisory councils for the AMAs. And I don't know, again, what words we put there, but I see this as more than just advisory. So I would prefer not using that
Agreed.
word at this point.
Yes, Jay.
Just a note, I guess it's the second slide under, or second bullet point under appointment process. And I guess we can come back to it if we're moving on, but, and it references slide 31, but if there's a list of recommended members and a tribe is shares a boundary, I could see the council wanting to have a representative of a tribe on it to facilitate that engagement. So I just don't want to foreclose that opportunity for them to suggest members for the appointment.
Thank you, Jay.
Bruce?
Yes, Representative Travers.
So for me, I would like not to have any legislative representation on the board.
Okay.
Just because there's a whole host of issues that you could get into. And if this is a legislative council is going to go ahead and make decisions and recommendations that are going to go straight to ADWR, then I don't know that they need to necessarily sort of be involved in the process unless we think that they're going to hold up any potential future legislation by not being on it. But we've seen how being on it doesn't really matter anyway. Or can we use, to Tom's suggestion, some of the other entities, even though they're on a federal level, if they live in the area that, I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing ideas here, but
Okay.
somebody wants to speak besides me.
This is Madam Chair. Flores.
Yes, go ahead.
To Jay's point, it seems that my little mouse doesn't want to cooperate with me, but somebody talks and then I get on. But sorry to double back. But to Jay's point about having a tribal representative, I think we need to have input from all the tribes again, whether it is from an individual tribe, but also maybe ITCA can be that person sitting on this committee, this council, and then they could. That's just an idea I want to throw out there, but we need to discuss it in among the tribes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chairwoman. And I think every groundwater basin that would be subject to this and a candidate for this area is going to be very different. Dr. Springer brought up a great point about, there are some water use sectors that are not going to be in every groundwater basin. And so I think where we see the opportunity for local entities, whether it's counties, cities, towns, electeds, to submit potential candidates to be on the council is a way to tailor that to the custom needs of the groundwater area. But I want to acknowledge, and I think Jay's point was a good idea, if applicable, a local tribal nation should also be able to submit a list of suggested members. So we'll definitely incorporate that.
Jamie.
Question. Elected officials. Are we talking all elected officials, as in the constable that serves process for the justice court, all the way up to our state representative, school board members, fire board members? And you know what? We've got chairmans of irrigation districts that are elected officials.
Good point.
I think that's very, very broad. I have a little bit of concern about that open door.
Thank you. Good point. Yes, Chris, you.
I would like to have a little bit more discussion on bullet 1 under appointment process. I don't know if you get bad politics out of it being appointed versus elected, or I'm kind of struggling with that one. There's politics in everything, but I think that somehow if you can minimize that and really have it just be a public service instead of a political junkie approach to things, have it be a public service approach in this process to get it done. I don't know. I'm thinking of the groundwater user advisory committees. I think those work pretty well, but if I talk to many of those that work with them, maybe they'll say otherwise. I don't know, but I'm seeing Natalie, and maybe she knows different than I do, but I tend to agree with a lot with what Senator Kerr said, that, elections are good. I just wanted to make sure that they're great. And I don't know if that needs to be looked at and more input from the council or not.
I know we have discussed it as a committee, and the majority suggestion was not election, more of an appointment. So while we acknowledge that there was a difference of opinion associated with that, we decided not to incorporate election and take more of an appointment approach.
And that appointment process would be outlined with lots of input, I presume, so.
Yes.
Bruce, Ron Doba, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Ron.
First of all, I just want to say that I agree with the previous comment regarding bullet 2 there and elected officials. That could be, construed as being extremely broad. But back to bullet number 1, members must be appointed, and they're going to be appointed from this list that's been submitted. Is it the governor that's going to be doing the appointing, or who is actually going to be making these appointments?
Governor.
Governor, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, did we actually, for the key concepts?
For the
that
key
we
concepts, we
defined-
did not define
Yeah.
that, but we had suggested the governor, yes.
Yeah, the original proposal was the governor, but we had feedback from enough different members that there were enough different interests to consider both the number of members and the actual, the appointing official or officials at a later time, rather than making a recommendation from this committee.
Right. I'm thinking we're going to come back to this. So, yes, Paul.
Maybe you just said what I needed to hear, but just, I think but the feedback I'm getting from the agriculture sector is this is an important point. And so I just wonder if we should look at it a little further as to whether election is a possibility.
I guess what I would do is I would ask the committee members, we've discussed this before, and a majority of the committee members said, no, it should not be an election, it should be an appointment. But I'll reach out to the committee members to get your opinion. Thoughts? Jamie?
If you're asking for it today, we support appointment.
Okay. I see a lot of heads nodding appointment.
Bruce Rondoba, I would support the appointment. I just think that the elections are going to be a pretty onerous process to go through.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, yes. Right.
Yeah.
I asked who was going to pay for it because the Mojave County's looking at an $18 million deficit for this budget year.
Yeah, I raised that question, Sharon Megdal. I raised that question at a prior meeting, and it's a real question. And also, I just want to note, I run for the Central Arizona Project Board. It's the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. I don't know what the vote rates are up here in Maricopa County, but it's way at the end of a ballot. It's way undervoted. We know what, votes are. I just don't see the justification for having this rise to a level of election when there's no taxing authority. We haven't talked about any actual revenue raising authority.
Right.
So I think that would be such a cumbersome task for this.
Okay.
On the other hand, I think there was quite a bit of disagreement at one point about the governor making all the recommendations, so there have been various proposals. So I agree with whoever said needing to come back to it. But Paul, sorry, I like you, and we agree on a lot of things, but I don't agree on the...
It is noon. We will come back to this. If we could go to the last slide, or the slide on next future meetings. We will address at the next meeting. I'm thinking that we're going to have to schedule another meeting between now and the November 16th or 17th meeting. Yeah, our next meeting was scheduled for November 16th. I'd like to suggest that we schedule another meeting between now and then. For those of you that are traveling, I apologize. Please do virtual if you can, but very appreciative of the amount of effort that you're putting into this committee and the travel time that you're taking. But we have a council meeting on the 27th. At the council meeting, I'll give them an update on what we have agreed on when it comes to the various concepts. And then there's another water policy council meeting November 27th, so at the end of November. Is it the 29th? I'm sorry, it's the 29th. Oh, November's the 29th. Thank you. We're also working on developing the recommendation and drafting that. I'm hoping that by Thursday, November 16th, we'll have something in advance for you to review, and we begin drafting what this recommendation will look like for the governor. So still quite a bit of work to do, but very much appreciate all your time and effort associated with these meetings. Appreciate your input. If you have any additional thoughts, especially on the membership, please send that out in writing so that we can incorporate that and have that and be a little bit more proactive in our discussion for the next meeting. And we'll get to you a date for the next meeting. I'm thinking probably today or tomorrow. I would hope that we can get a date out to the group. Any other comments or suggestions before we?
Bruce?
Yes.
Jamie, not to dictate your schedule, but I think it would be beneficial if you could have that meeting with the tribes before our next.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. Before we conclude today's meeting, any other comments?
Well, Bruce, I appreciate the department's optimism with that last bullet that the committee is on track to be done by November. We were so close. We need another one.
That was before today.
Yeah. But I just want to say I'm very pleased with the conversation that we had at this committee today. I think it was productive. I think we got a lot of great feedback. I think the process of coming up with a high-level outline, and then we've created an amazing stable of details and ideas that can be used and drawn upon to plug into that high-level outline as further discussions happen. So thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other comments? If not, that concludes today's committee meeting. Thank you all.